looking at Bloom's taxonomy, it's clear that the skills at the top of the pyramid use the skills at the bottom of the pyramid. But I do want to say that you don't necessarily need to master the skills at the bottom before you hit skills at the top, though there is this sort of natural progression through the pyramid. Now, there is a drawback to Bloom's taxonomy in that it's not really specific to the content of a particular discipline. So I talked to Bill Penwell, expert in assessment, about some of these drawbacks in Bloom's taxonomy.
So from the standpoint of learning sciences, we talk about how most learning is domain specific. That is, what it is to learn and what complex knowledge looks like, knowledge production looks like in every domain is different. And so Bloom's is a taxonomy developed before an appreciation of how learning is domain specific. Different disciplines have different standards, say, for what constitutes an adequate scientific explanation and for also what is the investigative process. So some sciences work principally through design of experiments. Other sciences develop through the simulation and modeling, where variables can't be manipulated. Biology is a great example. In certain fields, like large ecosystems, it's very difficult to run experiments. And when you go, let's say I'm a physicist and I go hear a biologist talk, what strikes me as odd about that? What strikes me as perhaps less satisfying about the explanation? And the converse could be true for a biologist listening to a physicist who might sit there and say, well, I can't do that in my discipline.
So in other words, the higher level types of practices in physics might look quite different from the higher levels in biology. So with that caveat, I do find Bloom a useful tool for just identifying the different levels of understanding that we're asking of our students. So let's go back to the 3 pigs example. In these 3 example goals, what is the Bloom's level of each of these goals or objectives? So let's look at describe the main characters in the story and their roles. I'd say that's more than just simple recall. It's actually showing that students have achieved some level of comprehension. So I'd say this is at the understand level. Defend the use of the rule of 3s as a literary technique. Anytime you see that word defend, this is really getting students to make a judgment or argue a case. That's part of evaluation. What about apply the literary techniques learned in class to your own writing? That's really getting at a couple of different ideas. You want them to apply something, so it's probably in the application phase, but then you're asking them to create something by writing. So I would say it's sort of getting at both apply and create, but the idea is that it's up in the upper levels of Bloom's. So sometimes it's hard to pinpoint exactly which level of Bloom's that you're at. It doesn't really matter so much. You don't want to split hairs. It's just helpful to see that some things are in the upper levels and some things are in the lower levels. Now that you've thought about these different levels of understanding, how do you think about the level that you want your goals and objectives to be at?
When I'm writing my learning goals and thinking about what level I want to write them at, I often have to think about how deeply do I want a student to understand something and how much time is it going to take for a student to come to that kind of deep understanding. You can't have students learn everything very deeply given the amount of time often that we have. So you have to pick and choose. What are the central things I want them to take away from this course when they leave? How does that build on what they know and what they need to know when they go to the next course or their professional experience?
So now we've talked about different ways to unpack your particular topic, identifying the components of that topic, looking at the types of knowledge that you want students to learn about that topic, and then the levels of knowledge in that topic. So now that you've done all that unpacking, what do? Well, you actually have to do some repacking of all of those components into your learning objectives. So let me give you an example. So imagine from our unpacking process, we realized that one of the things that we want students to know about matter is that pure substances have characteristic physical and chemical properties. Okay, so one core idea. And then by looking at the types of knowledge, we realize we want them to have the skill of constructing explanations based on scientific claims. And then by looking at Bloom's taxonomy, we know that we want them to achieve at some higher levels. So a possible learning objective that combines all those pieces is that students should be able to construct an explanation in which substances are identified from characteristic properties. So that gets at all of those pieces. So you might not necessarily need to go through this detailed of a unpacking and repacking process for all of your objectives, but it's just helpful to look at an example of where you do this in some detail, because it can help guide you in your general approach. So that was a lot of detail in this video about how to write learning objectives, but it's not really that hard. And I want to remind you that it really is worth this upfront work.
In the work I've done in the learning sciences, I've really focused on learning goals as an anchor for planning curriculum. Once you take a course to teach, even though there may be some standards that you're expected to meet for that course, there's still going to be a lot of room to decide on readings, decide on assignments, decide how you're organizing that course. And generally speaking, you need an anchor or a compass to help make those decisions. And if you don't have clearly articulated learning goals, you're going to be moving in a lot of different directions. So it's some upfront work, but it's work that will kind of pay off in terms of the general efficiency of your work over the course of the semester.
So another discussion option. Here from the last video, you should have some ideas of how to deconstruct a topic into its component parts. Now I want you to brainstorm what types of knowledge you want students to have, skills, content, affect, metacognitive, about that topic, and how deeply you want students to know it. And then put this together into a couple of sample learning goals. And it's great if you have the opportunity to get some feedback, because that's where we really get a chance to iterate. In the next video, we're going to look at some strategies for making sure that your goals are actually useful for your instruction.